Okay, so here we have the turn signal and parking light housing from a 1967 AMC Ambassador, and the light bulb burned out, and I have not been able to replace it because the socket down in there is so rusted and corroded that if I try to put a bulb in, I can't get it in there. It'll just break off because the rust and corrosion in there will not allow the bulb to snap into place. So I am going to figure out on the fly here how to replace that socket. The sockets for the number 1157 bulb are sold at Napa, and so the problem is that there is a flange in here that holds the old socket in place, so we have to get the old socket out and then somehow figure out a way to hold in the new one, which does not have that flange on it. So I'm going to figure it out, and I will post the video when I figure it out. Okay, what I found is that to get the old turn signal, the old socket out, you just have to take a screwdriver and pound with a hammer and just damage the flange that holds it in, and then it'll come out. So I can't do it and hold the camera at the same time, but if you can picture, I'm just putting a screwdriver in there and hitting the flange. You can see where it's already been damaged over here by me, and I'm just going to keep going around because the housing rotates, and I'll just take it out that way. And voila, there's the old socket, and here's the housing, which does not have the socket in it. It used to be like that, and now I've just pounded the flange off, and so there's the old socket with the wiring clip right there. So now we have to take the new socket and somehow, here it is, here's the new bulb socket, which is a different design than the old one. It has spring-loaded contact terminals, which will be a lot easier to use than the old ones, which just were just held in there and had no spring-loaded anything. We have to figure out a way to put this into the housing and hold it in place. It may be as simple as simply putting it in there and then pounding out a new flange, sort of like the old one, but I'm not sure yet. So that's the next step. Okay, so we have found that the new socket, which is on the left here, compared to the old one, sticks up much farther, as you can see, past the flange. And when you try to put it into the housing, it won't work because there's no room for the bulb up here. If you put the socket in, it sticks up way too far and the bulb interferes. So the only solution is to drill a new hole in the back of the housing and put the new socket in there and just plug up that old hole with something. This would have made more sense to begin with. I have to criticize AMC's designers on that one, and it'll actually make it much easier to install the bulb in the future because you'll be pushing it straight into the housing rather than at an angle. And there is no reason, as far as the car goes, to not do it this way because there's nothing behind the turn signal housing that would interfere with the socket being back there. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to figure out the right size hole to drill and drill a hole and go from there. Alright, so now we have drilled an 11/16 hole straight in the back of the housing, and the new socket will fit in there like that. But now we have to watch out because now that this is sticking out straight out, it may be too long, and the lens, when it goes in, the bulb will come out too far and hit the lens. So we have to actually space this back a little bit before we fasten it in. As far as the fastening goes, I can't think of any better way to do this than to solder it in place. There's no way to crimp that or anything, and there's no, obviously there are no threads on it or anything, so I'm going to mark how far the housing goes in there, and I'm going to use some muriatic acid and solder that together. Because remember, this is the electrical ground. This has to be connected electrically to the socket, because the ground is through the chassis of the car through these holes here. So we have to make sure that's a good electrical connection. Okay, so it's kind of ugly looking, but I have soldered the socket onto the housing, and I just plugged up the hole with some HVAC tape, which you could use a rubber grommet. I'm going to have to do something with that eventually more permanently, but I put a piece inside and outside, and it should be okay for the time being. So now we have the ends of the wires going in there, and we have to take the wires off of the old connector, the old lamp from here. There we go. And take that connector right there and splice it onto the wires from the housing that has a new socket. Now what you have to do is pay attention to the slots. Let me get under the light here, maybe it'll focus a little better. The bulb is indexed by these grooves. It kind of looks like a backwards L that you're looking at there. That's where the pins of the bulb go into the socket, and one is shorter than the other. You see, that's the short one and that's the long one. That backwards looking L, that's where the pins latch in. And so when you splice on the connectors, you have to pay attention to which wire is going into the terminals inside there, so that you get your parking lamp and your turn signal lamp correct when you plug it in. And with that, that should be it. And so now here we have the finished lens with heat shrink tubing and the original connector. And piano music in the background. So we'll go put this back in the car. Oh, put the gasket back in there too. Okay, so here is the Ambassador. You see the name there. And down here, where the signal light goes, you can see that that's where it mounts in the bumper. And even with the additional length of that socket, it has no problem whatsoever fitting right where it did originally. Oops, I forgot, I have to go from the front, or from the back rather. So I'm going to screw that in, plug it in, and then we'll try it. And voila! There it is. Working perfectly. I have the parking light on and the turn signal light. And now, as long as I have the car, I can always change that bulb easily. It is very cold out here. It is January 7th, 2014. The temperature right now is about 5 degrees here in West Virginia. I don't know, maybe it's up to 8 or 9 by now, but it's very cold. I'm going to get back inside, but hope this helps.